The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed in my ears like the steady hiss of a kettle about to boil over. I could almost taste the acrid tang of overcaffeination on my tongue, coffee cold and bitter in a chipped mug that had become a permanent fixture on my desk. I pressed my palms into my eyes, the sting of exhaustion blurring the sterile glow of the office around me. Somewhere in the halogen haze, something had shifted. My name is Marisol Vega, and for the last 5 years, I poured every ounce of myself into Tech, an upstart IT firm that branded itself as family. I believed it. I signed on for the long hours, the weekend sprints, the pitch-black early mornings. I told myself it was temporary, just until the big funding round, just until the next product release, just until we finally proved to the world that an underdog could topple giants. I told myself my sacrifice would pay off. And it did until it didn't. I clicked open my inbox, scrolling past the usual cascade of bug reports and feature requests. My throat went dry when I saw the subject line, Employment status. No flourish, no greeting, just that terse clause hanging like a guillotine blade waiting to drop. I pressed the message. The body was equally succinct. Marisol, we regret to inform you that your position with Tech is being terminated, effective immediately. Please contact HR for details. No apology. No acknowledgement of my 5 years of blood, sweat, and tears. No recognition of the 90-hour weeks I'd logged, the nights I'd dragged my aching body back into this very chair because family meant you went the extra mile. No validation for the sleepless nights I spent debugging code or the weekend phone calls I took from panicked clients. Nothing. Just the quiet click of a sentence telling me I was no longer part of the story I'd helped write. My breath hitched. I read the email again, as if the repetition might reveal a hidden paragraph, an explanatory note, a line of comfort. But the emptiness of that void only widened the chasm in my chest. I felt the cool metal of my coffee mug, the one with the chipped rim, as I lifted it. The stale liquid inside did nothing to soothe. The hum of the lights rattled my spine, and the taste of burnt grounds lingered like ashes on my tongue. It wasn't just a firing. It was a betrayal. I sat there, heart pounding in a slow, deliberate rhythm, as office chatter drifted around me. The hum of the ventilation system, the mechanical sweep of keyboards, the rustle of a page being turned in the pile of policy manuals by the conference room, none of it reached me. My world had contracted to the 4 corners of this email window, a rectangle of digital indifference. I thought back to the day I signed my contract, back when I was fresh off a promotion at a corporate giant that never noticed my extra efforts. Tech promised something different, a culture of mutual support, of personal growth, of solutions born out of collaboration, not exploitation. They hosted family lunches, complete with catered sushi and motivational pep talks from the CEO. They plastered walls with slogans about shared vision and heroic culture. They marketed late nights and weekend hackathons as badges of honor. They told us burnout was temporary, a proving ground, a character-building exercise. They lied. I closed my eyes and could still hear the patter of rain against the office windows on those endless nights, the clack of my keyboard keys echoing down the empty halls, the distant hum of the server room that I guarded as if protecting the company's heartbeat. I remembered the day I discovered a critical vulnerability in our flagship product and stayed until dawn to patch it, only to be greeted at 7 a.m. with an all-hands email congratulating the entire team. They never singled me out. They never said thank you. But they took all the credit. I had believed in them. I had trusted them with my time, my ambition, my sanity. 5 years in, my hair had more silver than I cared to admit, and my skin had that dull sheen from 10 p.m. fluorescent light exposure. I missed births, anniversaries, weekends with my daughter. I missed birthdays, movie nights, afternoons lounging in the park. But I never complained. I told myself it was the price of success. And now, a silent email had shattered everything. For a long moment, my chest felt too tight to breathe. Then a slow, deliberate calm washed over me. The first spark of clarity ignited behind my eyes. They thought they could discard me without pause, no conversation, no farewell, no explanation. They were wrong. I pressed my palms flat against the desk, feeling the grooves in the laminate under my fingers. The cold surface grounded me, anchored me to this moment. Beneath the sting of betrayal, something else flickered to life, something quiet but fierce. Survival. Justice. Revenge. I let the coffee mug clatter onto its saucer, black liquid sloshing and spilling onto the desktop. My colleagues glanced over, but I didn't flinch. I straightened my shoulders. If they were watching, they saw a woman who had just been told she was worthless, but refused to believe it. I opened a fresh email draft to HR. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, a heartbeat away from seeking more details, more closure. But I paused. Instead, I minimized the window. There would be time for that later. First, I needed to think, to plan, to gather evidence. Every meeting I'd attended, every policy I'd adhered to, every instance I'd championed their culture of heroic burnout. I would piece together the narrative they had built and then pull it apart from the inside. I stood and stretched, the muscles in my neck cracking from weeks of tension. I walked to the glass-walled conference room where annual performance reviews were held. Behind the frosted film, I could see my old performance reports, the ones that capped my loyalty with glowing praise. I could still smell the tail end of the day's lunch catering, a faint hint of smoked salmon. I pressed my palm against the glass, tracing a circle in the condensation of my breath. My shock solidified into resolve. They had weaponized my dedication against me, sold me on being a hero in their cult of burnout, and then discarded me when I was no longer useful. But I wasn't disposable. I was a force. I moved back to my desk, slid open a drawer, and pulled out the slim manila folder where I'd stored every curious memo, every ambiguous email, every whispered comment about overachievers. The folder was a relic of my own self-preservation, filed away in the moments I'd felt uneasy, notes taken on the sly, always with an eye for detail. It was time to sift through it all. I flicked on my monitor and opened a clean spreadsheet. Column A, date. Column B, correspondence. Column C, witnesses. Column D, inferred meaning. Already, the first entry filled the screen, the midnight email from my manager praising extraordinary sacrifice. I scrolled down to the next. The 2 a.m. chat logs about sleep is overrated. I scrolled further. The October memo about trimming staff who weren't pulling their weight. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. The hum of fluorescent lights was still there, but it sounded different, like the siren song of a machine I'd once thought benign, now revealed as a predator. I flexed my fingers over the keyboard, ready to type my first entry. I would not let them rewrite my story. I would expose the cult of heroism that masqueraded as family. I would make them see the cost of their so-called culture, and I would see to it that justice was served. Because they had forgotten one crucial fact about families, someone always remembers. And I was never the forgetful type. I opened the spreadsheet at dawn, the pale light of sunrise bleeding into the window panes like a promise. My eyes felt gritty, but I couldn't stop scrolling. Entry after entry revealed how they'd woven burnout into our job descriptions, phrases like expect to be on call, flex hours encouraged, sacrifice for the mission, all buried in the fine print of performance goals. It was systematic, calculated, and criminal in its own corporate way. I leaned forward, tapping the spreadsheet tabs, email logs, Slack threads, meeting notes. I created a new document, Patterns of Exploitation. Underneath, I jotted bullet points. Hero culture, email sent every quarter. 2 a.m. mandatory brainstorm sessions on weekends. Overachiever award tied to extra 20 billable hours. Each bullet felt like a nail in their coffin. Next, I thought of Rosa, my former teammate, who'd nearly collapsed last year after a 72-hour on-site hackathon. She'd confided in me that HR brushed off her exhaustion as growing pains. I dug through my notes until I found her number. My hand trembled when I dialed. Marisol, she answered, voice guarded. Hey, Rosa. It's me. Are you free for a coffee? She hesitated, then sighed. Yeah, I owe you one. 40 minutes later, I watched her stir sugar into cappuccino foam at the corner cafe. The corners of her eyes were dark, fatigue-etched deep. I slid a manila folder across the table. I've got a list of dates, emails, meetings. I need to know what you remember. I'm building a case. Her jaw clenched. They'll blacklist me. I tapped the table. Not if we do this together. Anonymously. But we need your voice. She nodded, fingers white-knuckled around her cup. I'm in. That afternoon, I reached out to Simon Patel, the QA lead who left 6 months ago. His LinkedIn still listed Cronus Tech, 2017 to 2024. I sent him a brief, encrypted message, need your help with company practices. Interested in sharing your experience? His reply came within the hour, absolutely. It's time someone did. Meanwhile, I set up a burner email and a secure folder in the cloud. I organized the evidence, screenshots from after-hours Slack channels, timestamped emails from management praising relentless dedication, HR memos that celebrated 100-hour workweeks as team milestones. In each file, I scribbled notes. This shows complicity. This implicates senior leadership. This is toxic recruiting bait. Late that night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, laptop open, daughter's drawings pinned to the refrigerator behind me. I thought of the weekends I missed, her dance recitals, our baking experiments, the magic shows we'd practiced in the living room. A lump caught in my throat, but I refused to cry. Anger coursed through me instead. For every time they told me I was part of a family but treated me like a machine. For every time they rewarded my work with empty slogans. For every sleepless night I spent proving my worth. I drafted the first version of a letter to corporate headquarters, outlining the patterns I discovered. I wrote it as a neutral observer would, highlighting the legal and ethical breaches, unpaid overtime, coercive, voluntary work, negligence of mental health. I cited specific policies they'd violated. My fingers hovered over the send button, but I paused. This was only the beginning. First, I had to ensure I could protect myself and my collaborators. Over the next few days, I created a network. Rosa connected me with 2 more ex-employees who'd quietly slipped out in exhaustion. Simon introduced me to a journalist at a local tech magazine. I even consulted an old friend from law school, now an employment attorney, who agreed to review my dossier pro bono. In return, I helped her identify witnesses and sharpen witness statements. Together, we transformed individual stories into a cohesive narrative. In that process, something unexpected happened. I felt alive again. Each conversation, each confession, each corroborating email was a small victory. The spreadsheets grew thicker. The timelines grew clearer. There was a symmetry to it, an order I'd never found in the chaos of code deadlines. I was turning their weapons, their family values, their forced heroism, against them. One evening, I sat at the attorney's office, a quiet downtown loft with exposed brick and the smell of old books. She flipped through my color-coded binder. "This is compelling," she said, eyes flicking over red highlights. "But we need one more piece, a leadership admission. Something from the CEO or a C-suite exec showing they intentionally encouraged excessive hours." I nodded. I knew exactly where to look. The CEO's monthly all-hands town halls, which were streamed and recorded. I logged in, searching for transcripts. There it was, an offhand comment: "If you're not working weekends, you're not really committed to Cronus Tech's mission." He'd said it in front of the entire company 6 months ago. I clipped the timestamp, downloaded the recording, and uploaded it to my secure drive. DNA on the tape. Undeniable proof of institutional pressure. The cherry on top of my case. That night, as I locked my laptop, exhaustion tugged at me. But it was different now, tempered by purpose. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for everyone they'd bled dry. I imagined the shock on their faces when the story broke, when the world realized that their family had been a front for a burnout factory. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The weight of what I was about to do pressed against my ribs, but it didn't crush me. It steeled me. Tomorrow, I would finalize the press package. The day after, I would deliver the dossier to the employment tribunal. And soon, I would watch Cronus Tech face the fallout. Yet, despite the momentum, I knew I had to move carefully. They were powerful, with deep pockets and hungry lawyers. Retaliation was a real threat. I drafted an anonymous tip to the tech magazine, time to go live immediately after my official complaint was filed. I set up alternate communication channels in case my burner address was traced. I even arranged safe storage of prints in my attorney's vault. By the time I fell asleep, the first light of morning was brushing the horizon. In my dream, I stood at the edge of a canyon, peering into a void. The wind howled around me, but I felt no fear. I lifted my arms, and the canyon walls trembled. When I woke, the resolve in my chest was cold and clear. I was no longer the frantic engineer who bent herself into a pretzel for a company that spat her out. I was the architect of their reckoning. I settled into my home office just before dawn, the faint glow of my laptop screen illuminating the stacks of binders around me. Today was the day the world would learn Cronus Tech's secret, that the company's so-called family was nothing more than a web of coercion and burnout. I opened the folder labeled Press Package, Final, and ran my eyes over the documents one last time. The CEO's town hall transcript clipped with time code, HR memos celebrating 100-hour workweeks, emails praising heroic sacrifice, Rose's signed witness statement, Simon's personal account, the attorney's legal memo. Each piece fit together like a blade in a sheath, ready to be drawn. By 8 a.m., I had scheduled 2 emails, one to TechPulse magazine with the full press package attached, and another to the Regional Employment Tribunal with a formal complaint. Both messages had been crafted meticulously, concise, factual, and unemotional, letting the evidence speak for itself. I stared at the send button for a moment, my fingers hovering above the touchpad. My heart paced, but I felt eerily calm. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about accountability. I clicked send on the TechPulse email first. The progress bar in the corner crawled from 0 to 100%, and then the little green check appeared, delivered. A current flickered in my chest, equal parts relief and anticipation. Within minutes, I forwarded the same dossier to the tribunal. I leaned back, closing my eyes to envision the ripple effects, headlines splashing across screens, social media outrage, share prices tumbling, lawyers scrambling. I opened my phone and checked my burner email. There was already one message from the TechPulse editor, Andrew Feldman. "We've received your materials. Thank you. We'll be in touch shortly." No congratulations, no sugarcoating, just business. I felt a smile tug at my lips. It was good. It was enough. All day, I kept half an eye on my inbox and the news feeds. I had taken precautions, alternate phone, burner SIM, VPN to mask my location, so I wasn't worried about being exposed. But the impact of seeing my name attached to such a bombshell was a different kind of thrill. I thought of my daughter, asleep 2 rooms away, and a pang of regret tightened around me. I had promised her stability, and here I was launching a corporate scandal. But I told myself it was worth it for her future, for every engineer who'd been chewed up and spat out. By early afternoon, the first story went live on TechPulse's website. Cronus Tech's culture of heroism exposed. Engineers speak out on toxic burnout, with an embedded excerpt from my complaint. I clicked the link and read through the introductory paragraphs, a sober summary of the allegations, a quote from my letter to the tribunal, acknowledgement of anonymous sources. Comments were already pouring in. "About time. I worked there. Can confirm. This is insane." I took a screenshot for my records and muted the tab. Within an hour, larger outlets picked it up. TechCrunch tweeted a link, BuzzFeed Tech ran a summary, and a LinkedIn thread under the hashtag #burnout at Cronus Tech lit up with first-hand accounts. My inbox pinged with dozens of messages, reporters requesting interviews, former employees expressing solidarity, legal aid organizations offering support. My secure phone vibrated with Slack notifications from the anonymous channel I'd created for collaborators. Rosa messaged, "I'm so proud of you." Simon texted, "They're panicking." I allowed myself a quiet chuckle. Late afternoon, I received an unmarked package at my door. I eyed the plain brown envelope suspiciously before tearing it open. Photos from the annual off-site retreat, executives toasting champagne while the engineering teams huddled over laptops in the corner. On the back of one photo, someone had scrawled in red ink, "Too bad your family didn't host you." My pulse quickened. This was more than a threat, it was a message of contempt, of retaliation. I photographed the images, encrypted them, and sent them to my attorney. I typed a reply to the anonymous channel, "Be careful." That night, I paced my living room, the dossier open on the coffee table. I thought of my father, who spent his life chasing corporate dreams and never noticed his daughter slipping away in the glow of her own monitor. I thought of my mother, long gone, who would have been proud of me for standing up to injustice. I thought of my daughter, who deserved a role model who taught her to fight for what was right. My phone crackled with a call. I answered on speaker. "Marisol, it's Andrew Feldman. Are you there?" I sat on the edge of the sofa. "Yes, Andrew. I'm here. Your story's blowing up. We're scheduling a sit-down interview for tomorrow morning. It'll go live alongside a deeper dive into the tribunal complaint. Are you comfortable speaking on camera?" I swallowed. Public speaking had never been my forte, but I had to seize the moment. "Yes," I said, firm. "I'll be ready." After I hung up, I felt the weight of tomorrow's commitment settle on me. The idea of being in front of lights and cameras, recounting my ordeal, made my stomach churn. Yet I knew it was crucial, to put a face to the allegations, to humanize the engineers who'd been exploited. I texted my daughter's school tomorrow would be a half day for me. I needed every minute to prepare. I lay awake all night, rehearsing what I would say, the hum of the lights that lulled me into a stupor, the promise of family, the silent email that shattered my faith, the cold resolve that followed. I thought of the tribunal, the courtroom, the possibility of justice, monetary damages, policy reforms, public accountability. I couldn't predict the outcome, but I knew the truth was on my side. Hours later, as dawn bled its first light into my bedroom, I finally drifted into a shallow sleep. In my dreams, I stood at a podium before a packed auditorium of engineers, executives, and reporters. My heart pounded as I spoke their truth, saw their faces nod in silent approval, heard their applause. As I finished, the room erupted not in condemnation, but in relief, the relief of a toxic life finally unmasked. When my alarm rang at 5 a.m., I sat up and exhaled, the memory of applause lingering like a benediction. Today, I would speak my story. Tomorrow, they would face theirs. I rose from the bed, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the bathroom mirror. The woman who looked back at me had fine lines etched around her eyes, a testament to years of laughter and strain. Her gaze was steady. Her voice, when it emerged, was quiet but unshakable. "I am not afraid." And with that, I set out to finish what I had started. The stale vinyl of the courtroom bench pressed against my legs as I shifted, a small reminder that I was far from the comfort of my home office. The January light filtered through high windows, casting pale rectangles onto the polished wooden floor where rows of folding chairs waited empty, soon to be filled with journalists, former Cronus Tech employees, and their anxious legal teams. I ran a fingertip along the edge of my notebook, feeling the raised spiral coils, and took a slow, grounding breath. I'd spent the last week preparing for this moment, refining my statement, rehearsing tough questions, coordinating with my attorney. My evidence sat neatly in binders on the table before me, the same binders I'd lugged to the employment tribunal's offices, their heft a physical testament to every unpaid hour, every coerced weekend, every sleepless night. Ahead, the tribunal's adjudicator would preside, hearing my testimony and those of my colleagues, parsing the documents that exposed Cronus Tech's heroic culture as nothing more than corporate coercion. Marisol Vega, the bailiff called. My attorney gave me a reassuring nod. I stood, smoothing the fabric of my blazer, and followed him to the witness box. The hard wooden armrest dug into my elbow as I settled in. I perched on the edge like a diver on the platform, ready to leap. The adjudicator, an older man with steel-rimmed glasses and a kind but unreadable expression, opened his notebook. "Ms. Vega," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. "Please state your full name and your relationship with Cronus Tech." I cleared my throat. "My name is Marisol Vega. I was a senior systems architect at Cronus Tech from March 2019 until my termination in June 2024. I led development on the company's flagship software platform and regularly worked more than 70 hours per week under the expectation of heroic dedication. My voice was steady. I'd practiced until my narrative felt rooted in fact, not fury. The adjudicator nodded. Thank you. You have submitted extensive documentation alleging systemic overwork and coercion. Please describe, in your own words, the culture that existed there. I inhaled. Cronus Tech sold itself as a family, but the only bonds they cared about were those that tied us to our desks. From the day I joined, I was told, explicitly and implicitly, that true commitment meant sacrificing personal time. Our job descriptions included phrases like voluntary weekend sprints and on-call as needed, but the implication was clear. If you wanted career advancement, you would choose Cronus Tech over your own life. I paused, remembering the hum of fluorescent lights after midnight, the grinding rhythm of my keystrokes echoing like a heartbeat. The executives reinforced this through quarterly Hero Award ceremonies that recognized the employees who logged the most after-hours work. It was a glorification of exhaustion. A lawyer for Cronus Tech leaned forward. Ms. Vega, would you characterize your work as unpaid? Isn't it true that you received overtime pay for all hours worked? I held his gaze. No, I said. My role was salaried. There was no overtime pay. In fact, any requests for compensation beyond my base salary were met with the suggestion that I was not aligned with the company's mission. I was told that complaining about hours would reflect poorly on my performance review. The adjudicator scribbled a note. You also provided email logs and internal memos. Can you summarize their significance? I clicked open my notebook to a bookmarked page. Here, I said, sliding a printed transcript toward the bench, is the quarterly memo from HR, celebrating the team that averaged over 85 hours per week. It's explicitly framed as a milestone, a reason for company-wide recognition and bonuses that, when you read the fine print, were never actually paid out unless you signed a non-disclosure agreement waiving claims to any future litigation. I glanced up. In other words, they rewarded us with titles and empty promises, then silenced us when the real costs became undeniable. A collective murmur rippled through the gallery at those words. I felt a flicker of vindication before I continued. Then there are the optional weekend hackathons, which were always mandatory if you valued your standing. Attendance wasn't tracked through clock-ins but through project milestones, meaning if you didn't show up, you simply never hit the metrics required for promotion. When I finished, the adjudicator leaned back, steepling his fingers. Thank you, Ms. Vega. We will call the next witness shortly. You may step down. I rose, heart still racing, and returned to my seat. My attorney whispered, "You did great." I managed a small, tired smile, but I felt charged, like raw electricity after a storm had passed. The tribunal would continue for 2 more days. Rosa would testify about her collapse during a 72-hour chain of code reviews. Simon would recount the moment he realized he'd been replaced by a junior engineer willing to work for free. The attorney would argue the legal violations. I would listen, ready to reinforce their statements if needed. After the morning session, we stepped into a small antechamber. Reporters from TechPulse and TechCrunch hovered, recorders in hand. I'd agreed to allow them brief quotes to keep the momentum of the public narrative on our side. I repeated my prepared line, "This is about integrity in tech, valuing people over profit." Each utterance felt measured, purposeful. Outside the tribunal building, gray clouds threatened snow. I buttoned my coat and looked up at the sky, recalling the countless mornings I'd trudged into Cronus Tech's offices in similar weather, too tired to notice the beauty of a fresh snowfall. Today, I felt differently, aware that the world still held magnificence beyond blinking cursors and server racks. That evening, I returned home to find a steaming bowl of soup waiting on the kitchen table. My daughter bounded in, cheeks flushed from park play. She wrapped me in a hug so fierce it lifted me off my feet. "How was your day?" she asked, eyes bright. I swallowed, bracing myself for the weight of my exhaustion. But for the first time in months, the fatigue felt bearable. "Progress," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "Big progress." She smiled and went to grab her homework. I watched her settle at the table and felt the walls of my living room expand, reminding me why I was doing this. Over the next 24 hours, news of the tribunal spread. Kronos Techa's stock dipped as investors grew uneasy. An internal memo leaked hinting at an urgent review of workforce policies. The company's PR team released a statement expressing deep concern and promising prompt action to ensure employee welfare. I knew it was damage control. They still hadn't apologized or acknowledged the harm, but it was a start. During a lull between sessions, I caught a glimpse of Kronos Techa's CEO on a live-streamed earnings call. His face was drawn, his voice clipped as he fielded questions about the controversy. I felt a brief surge of triumph. Here was a man who once exhorted me to prove my commitment, now struggling to prove his own. Then I steeled myself. This wasn't over. Tribunal findings, not media skirmishes, would bring real justice. That night, I drafted a personal letter to my former teammates, a summary of progress and instructions on how to receive the compensation and support we were seeking through the tribunal. I wrote it in calm, respectful language, mindful that solidarity was our greatest strength. By the time I clicked send, I had arranged support sessions with our employment attorneys and set up a private forum for everyone to share their experiences confidentially. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the distant hum of the city. The fight was far from over and likely to get messier. But as I traced the scars on my hands, remnants of code burned into my skin like tattoos, I realized I no longer feared the battle. I feared only complacency. Tomorrow would bring closing arguments, media interviews, and perhaps the tribunal's preliminary ruling. I'd spend the day ensuring every detail was airtight, every witness prepared, every narrative clear. And afterward, no matter the outcome, I would start rebuilding my life on my own terms. Because I had learned that true family doesn't demand sacrifice, it offers support. True leadership doesn't glorify exhaustion, it guards well-being. And true justice doesn't come from silent compliance, it emerges when the silenced find their voice. I turned out the light and slipped under the blankets, feeling the weight of all I'd sacrificed and the spark of all I stood to gain. The fluorescent hum that once defined my nights was gone, replaced by a stillness that tasted like possibility. I closed my eyes, ready for whatever the dawn would bring. The courtroom doors swung open one last time, and I stepped forward with my spine straight, heart steady. The adjudicator's gavel struck the bench, signaling the end of hearings and the beginning of judgment. I met his gaze as he cleared his throat. Kronos Tech is found to have engaged in unlawful labor practices, including coercive overwork and failure to compensate overtime, he announced. A hush fell over the room. Relief washed through me in icy waves. I closed my eyes briefly, imagining every exhausted engineer breathing easier. Outside, cameras flashed as I emerged under a gray sky cleared by rain. Reporters clamored, but I held up a hand. This victory belongs to every person who spoke out, I said, voice calm and firm. We proved that human dignity matters more than corporate profit. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. That afternoon, I walked home through streets slick with promise. I carried a small envelope, my settlement check. It was more than money, it was validation of years I'd given away. I paused beneath a blossoming cherry tree, inhaling its faint sweetness. I let myself smile. At home, my daughter greeted me with open arms. I tucked the check into my desk drawer. Some debts are best remembered, not flaunted. I poured us each a cup of tea and listened as she chattered about school. I realized then that my fight had not only reclaimed my past, it had preserved her future. Later, I sat at my refurbished desk, the fluorescent hum replaced by the soft glow of a desk lamp. I opened a new document, titled simply Boundaries. I typed the first line, work to live, don't live to work. Under it, I added, family first, always. And so I built my next chapter on my own terms, fortified by truth and guided by resolve. No more silent emails. No more heroic sacrifices. Just me, and the life I'd fought fiercely to protect.